Hello, everybody. Listen, feels like it's been like a long time since the last time that we were here. This studio looks so different. Kind of back then, you can see that we've been actually doing a few renovations and a few changes of things, hopefully making it look nicer, so we can do a lot more of these information, a lot of these material that we normally kind of share with you. But today, I want to talk to you about something very, very specific. I want to talk to you about whether the rooming house market is actually kind of saturated. We've been having a bunch of conversations with investors, most of this week, really, and the question keeps coming up over and over again. Have we missed the boat on rooming house investment? Can the market of rooming houses be saturated? Is it saturated? And particularly, why are there so many rooming houses at the moment that are vacant in a few quiet places in Victoria? So first, for those of you who never heard of me, my name is Henry Villa. I'm the managing director here at Stone Horizon, where we design, build, and operate rooming houses for investors. So this is our bread and butter. This is what we do every day. Design them. We physically build them. We're a building company at our heart. And obviously, once the properties are finished, our incredible property management team, which normally is sitting in that room over there, make sure that we have just the best quality tenants out there to provide the best return possible to our investors. So I guess that's the first question that I wanted to address today. Can the market actually be saturated? As many of you know, we live in a country where rental crisis is rampant. There's lots and lots and lots of tenants looking for a high quality accommodation, and unfortunately, we don't have a huge amount of accommodation currently available for most of them. It is very, very common, and you see in the media and in the news and in the newspapers all the time, we see pictures of openings that have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of potential applicants and potential tenants actually go and inspect the property. Many of them go and apply for them. And of course, unfortunately, there's only a handful of those people who can actually get lucky enough to be accepted to live there. Now, we have always believed that rooming houses, it's part of that solution. We have always believed that rooming houses is actually part of what we can do to kind of improve the conditions and improve the circumstances and help so many people out there that needs them. But of course, with that and with the increase in interest rates that we've had in the last couple of years, and with all these new changes and with all the kind of negative aspects and the new awareness that we're getting around things like developments and traditional rental properties and things like that, a bunch of new investors have come into the rooming house market. We obviously talk to lots and lots and lots of new people who are incredibly interested on investing on this very unique but very, very high cash flow strategy that obviously is creating big returns for investors out there. So the question inevitably pops up to many investors and in many of our conversations around, can the market be saturated? Can we actually have too many rooming houses? And also, there's some evidence that increases that fear that tenants have. There's lots of rooming houses out there who are either completely under-rented, plenty of vacancies in them, or some not rented even at all. And I think it makes sense to have a little bit of a conversation about why that we think that is, how that market looks from our end, and what are some of the things that we're doing and that we're seeing to avoid investors getting into trouble that way. So let's talk first about whether the market can technically be saturated. I guess technically the answer is yes. Any market out there, if you provide way more supply than the demand is, will eventually get to a point where there's more stuff to sell or more stuff to rent in this case than the number of people who ultimately wants to rent these properties, or the buyers who wants to kind of buy the goods and services in this case, obviously rental properties. However, I think it's important to bring this into perspective a little bit. I think it's important for us to understand the real numbers. And I've always found that in these kind of conversations, data actually helps. Not the reality actually helps. So let's talk about a couple of numbers, right? The first number is the number of rooming houses that exist in Victoria, and we're obviously going to focus in Victoria because that's kind of where we operate. So that's obviously the market that we know the best and the market that we can relate to the most. In Victoria, at the moment, there's about 1,500 legal registered rooming houses, right? Now, we can't really comment on the number of rooming houses out there that are being operated illegally or that are not registered, or the ones that are registered but are not shown in the register because of red tape and bureaucracy, and councils not necessarily doing a quick job at updating that. But we believe there's about 1,500 rooming houses. It's kind of what the official data is telling us, 1,500 rooming houses in the whole of Victoria. Now, there are millions of dwellings in Victoria. There are millions of houses in Victoria. And we're talking about an infinitesimally tiny portion of those properties that is occupied by rooming houses. So the supply, it's tiny. It's even worse or even smaller when you look at the particular type of rooming houses that we favor, the particular type of rooming houses that we think are a better fit for what the market needs and demands, which are what we call studio-style rooming houses. Is the rooming houses where each room effectively has its own ensuite, potentially its own kitchenette. Many of them have sliding doors that take them to private courtyards, provides a much higher level of independence between the residents of the rooming house, to the point where they feel like they have neighbors instead of housemates. We've spoken about these kind of a little bit before. When you look at those, we don't have real data about how many of those there are, but it's a fraction of the 1,500 rooming houses that exist in Victoria today. So the supply isn't massive, right? We personally we're probably one of the biggest builders of rooming houses in the state, because we focus only on building kind of rooming houses. But I can say that we build, a couple of dozen kind of rooming houses a year, right? We're not a massive volume exercise. Most builders who build rooming houses in Victoria are not in the hundreds. They're most of them are single digits, to be honest, and it's only a few builders that build a significant number of them. So when we do the actual numbers over time, we realize that it'll take a long time for that tiny little number to change significantly. We have done some modeling, and we'll talk about it in a second, about where the market's going and where the market is heading. And I think it's good to kind of reflect that supply, it's not going to be an issue. Even if every single person we talk to were to end up um, mm, investing in rooming houses in the way that we believe is kind of appropriate, it'll still take a long time for people to actually make a dent on what's possible in terms of saturating the market. We don't actually think that that's something that will happen in the short term, certainly not with that level of supply. However, like anything in property, like anything in the investment worlds, there's always markets within markets. And I think it's important to understand some of the other drivers of the market. Particularly, let's talk about demand, right? And the supply of alternative accommodation. Many people live in a rooming house by choice because they prefer to live in a small space where there's low maintenance, where the rent includes all the utilities. They don't need to worry about, mowing the lawn or massive amount of cleaning or things like that. However, it'll be silly to not recognize that other people who live in rooming houses live on that because the pressure on the regular rental market has made it almost impossible for many people to access affordable accommodation in the traditional rental market, and therefore they then look at places like the ones we build to then find high quality accommodation. We had some statistics that we collected by talking to a lot of real estate agents over the last 4 or 5 months. And one of the things that we hear over and over and over again is that with the high interest rates, the investors who are really suffering, the investors that are really paying the price, are the investors who have negatively geared properties. Those are the investors who were already losing money on those properties every month and had to put hand in their pocket to go and top up the mortgage to be able to keep the properties and keep them in the rental market. What we are hearing anecdotally from a lot of real estate agents that we contacted over the last 6 months is that about 75% of the properties that are currently being sold are investment properties. Let me just repeat the number because it's really big. 3 out of every 4 properties currently being sold every weekend are investment properties. So those are properties that are coming out of the rental pool. Those are properties that are coming out of the investment market. When you look at the other side of that coin, obviously for every seller, there's a buyer. Out of every property being sold, out of all properties being sold, only about 15% of those are being bought by investors. Again, if we look at it, out of every 100 properties, 15 of those are being bought by investors, which means that 85% of the properties being transacted on every day of the week, every weekend, are being bought by first time by owner occupiers, people who ultimately are going to live in the property, therefore they're not going to rent them to anybody. So probably you don't need to be super mathematically inclined to know that if you are taking 75% of the properties out of the rental market and then you're only going to put 15% of those properties back into the rental market, that rental market is going to get tighter and tighter and tighter over time. And that's certainly what we've been seeing in the last year. But we actually expect that to continue for as long as interest rates are this high. It is one of those things that it's just the nature of the beast. And it's the nature of having a property that is negative cash flow, is the negative of having a property that requires investors to put their hands in their pocket every month to then keep the mortgage, to keep the tenants on that property. And I think that's something that we just don't talk enough about. when we talk about rental crises and housing crises and things like that. However, what does that mean for us? That a lot of the people will normally go and rent a traditional rental, will now have no option other than look for alternatives. Now, some of those people who will, they'll be in the fence a little bit. Do I rent a house? Do I go and, stay in a Stone Horizon property? Ultimately, they're not gonna have that choice anymore, and many of them are gonna select to come and live in a rooming house, potentially in one of our properties, potentially in some of the many properties kind of out there. However, even with that massive demand, even with that really, really short supply of properties, we are still seeing that not all markets perform the same. We are seeing markets that feel more in demand, if you like, than other markets. We have the luxury and the insight of operating all across Victoria. We have rooming houses in every direction, in metropolitan Melbourne, in regional Victoria, going north, going east, going west, in every single direction of the state, and we continually increase our expansion, going to new towns in new areas where products like the ones we build are more and more needed. And we will continue to do that. But what that allows us to do is it allows us to know many of these markets incredibly intimately. We know these places because our team is there every day, every week, every month. And what that allows us to do is that allows us to have a level of insight that it's actually hard to see when you're remote, when you're not on the ground, when you're not talking to renters, when you're not renting properties, when you're not seeing kind of what happens. And what we've seen is that some markets are worse than others. There's better markets, there's worse markets. Now, I'm not about to go and shout a list here of what the current hot markets are or what the current, markets to avoid are. That's not what this conversation is about. It's important to say that list will change. That's part of the reason why we don't want to talk about it now, because if you see this video today when I'm recording it live, the list will have some areas and some towns and some suburbs in it. If you have a look at this video in a year or 2 or 5 or 10, a lot of the principles that I'm discussing today will still be incredibly valid, but the towns and areas and suburbs that are in that better or worse list will change over time. And that's why it's important that you keep an eye on what's really happening in your market, and that ultimately you have the right fresh information. So let's talk about what's happening without necessarily covering or without necessarily having to cover a huge amount of detail, which those areas are. There are some areas at the moment that I will consider not saturated, because like I said, the market is not really saturated in most areas. However, there are some areas that we are particularly being cautious on. The areas that we know incredibly well, where the financials of projects work really, really well, and you get incredible returns, but we're seeing more and more of these properties being built, and we see the rate of absorption of that stock is slowly slowing down. What that means is when, while we had properties that, we could get 30, 40, 50 applications in a period of 3 days or a week, now we are seeing it takes a week, maybe 2 weeks to rent those properties. Everything will rent for the right price. Everything will rent eventually. But we're seeing the rate and the speed of those rentals come down a little bit. And because of that, we're starting to be a little bit cautious. We want to make sure that we invest in the areas where the returns are better, where the demand's higher, where we can make a better impact, not only for the community that we serve, but also ultimately for our investors. Even in those markets, however, there is a dynamic. And there's a dynamic that it's important to do. So, what do you do if you are in a market like that? What do you do if you are in a market where you're seeing lots of competition kind of coming in and get to the point where you're a little bit worried about whether you're even going to be able to rent your rooming house into the future? And what we find is that the quality of the product determines the quality of the tenant. And let me explain that a little bit. For many, many years, there has been a trend with quite a number of not only operators, but quite a number of people who propose and push and sells rooming house as an investment, to go and take the oldest, crappiest, cheapest house that you can buy, put a lick of paint, a little bit of tabicary and subdivision, little kind of put extra walls and things like that to create extra rooms, and then get an exemption out of a dodgy building surveyor and ultimately turn it into technically a rooming house. Produce a thing that where the quality of the product it's effectively an old house with lots of rooms, more or less. Now, you guys have seen me talk about conversions before. We do plenty of conversions, but there's great conversions, and then there is crappy conversions. There is the kind of conversions that we see and that we work on that create a super high quality product. There are conversions that, in all fairness, should not exist at all, if you ask me. Some of the standards we have are just that. They're just the minimum standards, right? I think the minimum standard for bathrooms, for example, is to have a toilet every 10 people or so. Now, I don't know you, but I don't want to share my toilet with 9 other people. There's a whole sorts of logistical problems that can create. Now, those of us who really know this industry have always been saying the minimum standards are just the minimum standards. We're not suggesting that you go and do a rooming house, 9 rooms, 9 people, 1 toilet. However, lots of people do, because toilets are expensive, bathrooms are expensive, and adding more bathrooms and more toilets to a rooming house not only is expensive, but it's also hard to do. And in so many instances, it's not doable. You are limited on how many of these things can you put in an existing house. So you end up with this kind of crappy product that in many instances is hard to maintain or not maintained at all, that has some conditions where the people living there are really living in conditions that we wouldn't describe as quality. Right? But that's lots of that stock into some of those markets. I could potentially name 3 or 4 suburbs, 3 or 4 towns in Victoria where that is the predominant rooming house. And in all fairness, it is one of those reasons that is creating all this perception and all this stigma of what a rooming house is and what a rooming house it's seen to be historically speaking. However, in those markets, you also have some really, really high quality properties. Some of the properties we build, each room has its own ensuite, its own kitchenette, has great facilities. There are new property. They're purpose designed for the tenants who live there to provide high quality accommodation. So in a market like that, everything will turn into a continuum. And if you have the better product at the top of the market, that product will always perform better. And even in a saturated market, if it were to exist, or the more saturated market, or the markets are closer to being saturated, that high quality product, that top product, is always going to have the best tenants. And it's always going to be tenanted. And it's always going to be rented. In our portfolio, we have a degree of standards and a degree of levels of quality. There are some properties that we build that are super, super high end. There are some properties that we build that are shared facilities because of the nature of those projects. There are some properties that are conversions that we've helped our clients build. And there are some properties that we did not build at all, that were the owners of those properties had those properties pre-existing the relationship with us, and they ultimately, in the interest of helping them, we decided to manage for them. Because we have that range, we can see how those properties perform. And we can tell you right now that self-contained properties, they always rent for more, they always rent quicker, and the vacancies are lower. That said, markets move in cycles. And within those markets, there's always a continuum and a number. Sometimes the rents go up, sometimes the rents stagnate a little bit. Sometimes you're going to hear people talk about ridiculous numbers for rents because they just want to sell you their thing, and they're good. We have the benefit and the obligation to stay honest, because managing the whole range of alternatives, knowing that we build the property and that we manage the property at the end, we're very, very careful of the expectations we create, because it's no use to me telling you that you're going to rent a property for $380 or $550 or $1,000. Making those numbers up is easy. We know in our particular case, we then are on the hook to deliver those outcomes. So we're very, very realistic on the numbers we mention, and very, very realistic on the numbers that we put on things like feasibilities and business cases, not only because it's the right thing to do, to be honest, but also because ultimately we are going to get to that part of the project where we need to rent those rooms for the numbers that we mentioned, and we want to make sure that we get that point there. At some point in the future, I'm going to talk a little bit about rental strategies. Different people follow different strategies around the way they rent them. Some people maximize for yield, some people maximize for occupancy, some people maximize for price. We'll talk about those in a future in a future live, in a future conversation like this. We're also going to be covering a lot of what's coming in the upcoming book. I have the final edited version in my iPad, which I now need to read cover to cover for the last time before it goes to the printers. And hopefully in just quite a few weeks, we're going to have the actual book I'll be able to present. I'll present it here. We'll cover a lot of the content. We're actually going to be giving out a few kind of free copies. So if you want one, make sure you put your name and your details in the comments of this video, wherever you're seeing this. So that way we can make sure that we keep you in the list. More than happy to send you a free copy for you to cover it. We've been working on that book for over a year with a number of areas that we wanted to cover, different to not only what we cover in some of these videos, but also to the typical rhetoric that we've been seeing around rooming houses around the country. I want to leave you with just one final thought in this discussion about the rooming house market and the potential saturation of the rooming house market. And it's this. It's very, very important that you do not speculate when you're investing. Investing is managing risk. Investing is putting your money and your resources in a place where you can solve somebody's problem, and because of that, you earn the right to make some money back. rooming houses are well and truly a place where we achieve that. You're solving the accommodation problem, and particularly the affordable accommodation problem of so many people out there. And because of that, is one of the vehicles that provides the best return possible. Speculation is different. Speculation is gambling. You may as well walk into Crown Casino and put your money on red or on black. Now, how do you make sure that you're not speculating? How do you make sure that you're not just reading some random headlines or random comments out of a person that don't really know what they're talking about, which unfortunately there's so many of them out there. And it's to work with an expert. It's to work with someone who knows the market well, who knows the market of rooming houses like the back of their hand, who has been operating for quite a number of years and has made sure that it's transparent to you what they're doing, that has a very clear business model where you can tell right away how they're making money. You can make right away, what you're being charged for and how you're being charged. We were having a conversation today with a potential client, and she was telling us we were probably the fifth or sixth person that we were talking about rooming houses, that she was talking about rooming houses with. And it's incredible to see how everyone out there has all these obscure models where they're going and hiring builders and then putting kickbacks on top of those and hiding fees and not having a really transparent model. We believe that the people we work with deserve to know the reality of what it is. Of course, we are a business. Of course, we're aimed at making a profit, and we do make profit of the projects we do when we build and when we manage and things like that. But it's important that at least you know what it is. It's important that you work with an expert that knows the market, so that way they can give you the insight that they've been able to develop over the years in a way that will be almost impossible for you to get on your own, or at least it will take many, many years for you to get on your own. It doesn't really matter whether it's us or whether it's somebody else. There's a few experts out there who really know what they're doing. There's unfortunately many who have no clue. So if you have any questions, as always, feel free to post them on the comments below. I might respond to them directly or through another video, making sure that we are able to help you and to address which areas you're looking at investing in, where are you thinking of going, any other questions that you might have around the market dynamics. We'll be more than happy to provide open, clear, transparent, honest information that hopefully allows you to get the best return possible in a way that gives you confidence and that gives you certainty that you're going to get the outcome that you need. Now, I've been going for quite a while. Hopefully this has been useful. Stay tuned for many of these. We're going to turn them into a regular thing again. The next set of these sessions pretty soon will probably cover some of the content of the book. I'm going to do a little bit of a dynamic where we cover the different areas of the book and cover the different chapters for those of you who are not necessarily inclined to go and read a whole bunch of stuff, but I want to get the content and the gist of it too, and also allow those of you who ultimately want to explore whether this book is something you should read or not, to then determine whether this is for you. Again, have a good night. Hopefully that was useful. I look forward to talking to many of you very, very soon. If you have any questions, feel free to post them on the link below. Have a good night.